Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, share it, review it, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates on upcoming episodes. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Check out their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive. Or check out MetroJeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today. And now, here's today's episode of Baxie's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
I'm pretty sure that most of us have heard the old saying that good things come to those who wait. But since we're an impatient species prone to instant gratification in an on-demand world, many of us tend to ignore that old saying because we want things now. Sure, some of us are willing to wait things out, but for how long? I mean, I don't have all day here. I got stuff to do. But on the other hand, you could be the guy that everyone is waiting for. When's your book coming out? When are you going to get a job? When are you going to leave? Imagine listening to those annoying questions every single day. Now imagine hearing it for the last 25 years. Those questions are not so different from the ones that have been asked of Matt Johnson for the last quarter century. Matt Johnson is the leader and driving force behind the band The. From 1983 to 2000, Matt Johnson and The released 6 incredible albums which featured 15 singles, 7 of which reached the British top 40. Among them included 1983's international hit This Is the Day, followed up by Uncertain Smile, which were arguably 2 of the best singles of the entire decade. The next 3 albums, Infected from 1986, 1989's Mind Bomb, and 1993's Dusk, moved higher and higher on the UK charts. Ironically, this was never a band that was motivated by chart success. Instead, Matt Johnson's music has always been more defined by much deeper themes than typical chart toppers. This is a richly powerful body of music that combines deep social observations, politics, as well as incredibly thoughtful imagery. And while Matt Johnson appears to be a one-man show, his music has benefited greatly from countless collaborations. These include appearances from David Johansen from the New York Dolls, Sinead O'Connor, Lloyd Cole, Mark Allman from Soft Cell, Jules Holland, and many others. The music of Matt Johnson is the sort of stuff that makes your life better. It just does. Unfortunately, the last time that Matt Johnson released original material for The was in 2000 with the album Naked Self. After that, Johnson would concentrate on other projects, film scores, broadcasting, and publishing. He's also been involved in local activism, and during that time, he rarely granted interviews. He just lived his life. And it wasn't always so simple, including threats to his own health and the passing of several family members. And while he would be the subject of the 2017 documentary Inertia Variations, his last music release was a collaboration with Johnny Marr of the Smiths entitled We Can't Stop What's Coming. This was his first single in 15 years, a single which he dedicated to his brother Andy, who had died the previous year. In 2018, Matt Johnson announced that he would be reforming the band and would set out on a world tour. Finally, after 25 years, Matt Johnson has released a stunning new record entitled Ensoulment, a record which is as powerful and as beautiful as anything else that The has ever released. He's also currently on tour of the U.S., including a date at the Orpheum in Boston on October 19th. Like I said, Matt Johnson does not grant many interviews, so the chance to speak to him was an amazing treat. This is my interview with Matt Johnson from The on Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Hello.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very, very good. This is such a joy to speak to you. I gotta be perfectly honest. I know you don't grant a lot of interviews, so I'm very honored to have you here today. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. How's the weather where you are?
Very typical autumn day.
Good. Yeah. Well, I'm in Atlanta at the moment, and it's beautiful weather. It's perfect temperature. They say it's cooler than it normally is, but it's beautiful. Really
Well,
beautiful.
There are certainly worse places to be this week. That's for that's for sure, weather-wise.
Yeah.
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 So I have to assume that over the last 25 years, you have been hounded with people asking you questions about when you're going to release the next record, and I have to believe that you're hearing this every day, every week. I don't want to be the guy that asks you that question about what took you so long. I want to be the guy that asks you this: when's the next record coming out?
Oh, now that is a tricky question. See, I don't know my own mind half the time. I never know if I'm going to do another record quickly or take time. It's all very, very spontaneous. So I really don't know.
Well,
But it's a good question, though.
I have to believe that you do get tired of the questions of the inquiry about where things have been. I mean, it's certainly not like you haven't been doing things along the way. I guess the real question is why now? You certainly addressed it in the album, but in your own words, what was it about these times that motivated you to say it's time and it's time to do it now?
Well, there was a documentary that came out a few years ago. I don't know whether you saw it. It's called the Inertia Variations, and that sort of explained the situation. It was directed by one of my ex-partners, who's a Swedish documentarian, Johannes St. Michaels. And it's a complicated story, really, because we lived together in New York in the 1990s. And when we left New York, we moved to Sweden. And it was after I'd released Naked Self. And I did a massive world tour around about that. And I just got very, very tired and burnt out after that because unlike a lot of my contemporaries, I started extremely young. I was in bands from about the age of 11 or 12. By the age of 15, I was working in a recording studio in London's West End. By the age of 17, I formed The. So by the year 2000, I'd had quite a full-on, full-length career, and I was very burnt out. We left New York, moved to Sweden, had my first son in New York, and he was growing up in Sweden. And I just felt very tired, very burnt out. I didn't want to put records out just for the sake of putting them out.
Sure.
I felt that sort of cheating the audience. I mean, financially it might be lucrative, just to churn records out and go on tour. But the audience, no, I treat the audience with respect, and I think they would know if I was cheating them or cheating myself. And so I have a lot of interest outside of music. I get involved in conservation work in terms of building conservation and local politics, which was time consuming and a bit of a waste of time, really. I got involved in book publishing and film soundtrack work and did a lot of traveling. And it took a while just to get my energies back and my passions back for music. And with this record, I felt it was the right time to do it. I really felt I had something new to say. I felt passionate about music again, working with people that I love working with. I was looking forward to going out and meeting the audience again. And so I just felt like I felt when I first started out. And I'm happy the way things have worked out. And I don't view it as 25 years lost, because in that 25 years, I had a couple of children and spent a lot of time traveling, doing lots of very interesting things. And I feel quite rejuvenated now, actually.
It's interesting when you read reviews of the record or talk to other fans who have heard Ensoulment. They all kind of say this was worth the wait. That even if it was 25 years, it didn't feel like the lost a step or you lost a step. It really does fit in very nicely with the rest of the body of work. As I've been listening to it, I've been listening to it a lot over the last couple of weeks. It's such a stunningly beautiful record that is just loaded with a bunch of very furious themes. And I love that. But I think the real value of this record is there seems to be a real urgency to the message. It's very much a reflection of our times. It's not so unlike what Infected was 38 years ago. Tell me about that and about taking this opportunity to reflect what you're seeing in the world.
I'm very pleased with the response that the album's had, first of all, because you never know. We put a lot of heart, a lot of soul, a lot of passion in this record. And it's quite a nocturnal record in some ways. It's quite a gentle, thoughtful record. And I'm the age that I am now. I'm not going to pretend that I'm 25 and leaping about, and I've had a lot of life experience, a lot of wonderful things, a lot of sad things, like all of us do. When we get to a certain age, we would have experienced bereavement as well as the birth of our children and the ups and downs of life. And so there's that internal aspect about my own personal life, but of course, as you referred to, the world we're living in now is very, very strange, and I certainly wanted to comment on that. And there's a wonderful quote that I often think about, refer to, is the great Nina Simone once said that every artist has a duty to reflect the times that they live in, and that's what I've tried to do throughout my career. Albums like Infected and Mind Bomb and all the others, really. And with this one, although predominantly out of the 12 songs, I'd say probably 80%, 70% are very personal. They're about life and loss and love and longing. But there is a percentage, a smaller percentage of the songs which are quite political, particularly songs like Cognitive Dissident, which is the opening track of the album, which is really a reference to the Orwellian times we're living through. It sort of references 1984 in terms of, war is peace, etc., which was these Orwellian terms: double speak, double think, new speak, new think, whatever it was.
It's a really interesting song, the way, the lyrics, contradict each other to show, the irony of it all, and the divisiveness of, how we are reacting to each other, how we're, locked in devices, how we're either right or wrong or left or right. And it's really a fascinating way to open up the record. It's a wonderful, wonderful song, but it does really reflect how the world is today. And it is so much different than it was 5 years ago than now.
It's astonishing, really. And then you've got, and I know in the US as well as the UK, the rise of cancel culture. So people are terrified of expressing themselves. Even innocent thoughts can be misconstrued and twisted against them. And so this cancel culture has become predominant, and people are starting to self-censor. They're overthinking or not thinking or trying not to think, trying not to express themselves. And the divisiveness, I mean, that's one of the oldest tricks in the book, of course, isn't it? Divide and rule, where you have everybody at each other's throats, and then the people that really control things are able to carry on doing what they're doing, and having the rest of us bickering and arguing and fighting over certain things that maybe aren't so important. But we've seen, I suppose, also wanted to, in a track like Kissing the Ring of Potus, and the line, the coup that nobody noticed, in that song is really referencing the neoconservative, neoliberal takeover that's happened in Western democracies the last few decades. What I would refer to as the extreme centre, the very, very pro-war, pro-privatisation, as in transferring wealth from the working classes and the middle classes to the extremely, the small percentage of extremely wealthy people. And this has gone on all over the Western democracies, and this is something that is causing huge problems, and that somehow it's seen to be normal to be extremely pro-war, the terrible suffering that we see going on around the world, and we all seem to be powerless to do anything against it. And certainly our governments don't seem to represent the will of the populations. They just represent the will of a small minority of powerful interests.
There's a number of very intriguing songs on this record, and a couple I want to ask you about. The first one would be Some Days I Drink My Coffee by the grave of William Blake. I know, first of all, it's something you've actually done, had coffee by that grave, but you talk about that the London you knew was gone, and then it goes further than that, where it really does seem to have a lot of applicability to what goes on here in the States. And there's a lot of disenchantment that people have with how our governments are run and how our leaders are selected, and the corruptibility of government. Tell me where that sentiment comes from within you. I mean, obviously this has motivated you to write about it and to comment on it. Tell me about, where your feelings are on all of that.
Well, I grew up in a family, working class family, and my father was very politically aware. He was an old school Labour supporter. And this is where the Labour Party in the UK, which I suppose would have been the equivalent of the old Democrat Party, it's essentially more representative of working people. But they've been co-opted, they've been infiltrated to the degree, you had someone in the UK, Prime Minister Tony Blair, for instance, New Labour in the 1990s, who was very much the heir to Margaret Thatcher's. So what's happened is in the Western democracies, a lot of the old parties that you felt were anti-war and stood for social justice and fairness got infiltrated by the same people that had infiltrated the more right-wing parties. Where I stand on things, I think I'm a moderate in the old sense, in that I'm anti-war. I'm just pro social justice and fairness. I don't like. I'm also pro freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and people just treating each other with respect and kindness. I mean, this all seems to be common sense to me, but those sort of old-fashioned moderate views are now seen as extremist. You know, if you're not rabidly pro-war, you're seen as somehow suspicious. But we have similar things that have happened in the UK as in the US. We've got a new government led by Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, who's really the heir to Tony Blair, I suppose. It's the Labour Party, but you know, their foreign policy is identical to the Conservative Party, i.e., more war. This sort of infantile posturing that somehow, if you prove that you're prepared to sort of bomb lots of innocent people, that somehow you're tough or you're strong. The problem with politics, particularly in the US, but in the UK, is the money, the lobbyists. There's just too much lobbying. There's too many powerful interests that have infiltrated it, and the politicians, as you said earlier, they're selected. They're not elected, or they're selected before they're elected. So it's completely corrupt. It's completely infiltrated. And ordinary people, and that's why you get things like Brexit or the popularity of someone like Trump, because people are so frustrated with the system. And because Trump, when he first appeared, he promised to drain the swamp, that appealed to a certain amount of people, because they're sick of, in the UK, they're sick of the Westminster bubble. And the same, I suppose, applies in the US, the amount of corruption, and most people want a change, but they don't know, there's no one to turn to.
Right.
And someone like Trump initially probably promised to drain the swamp. And as soon as he was in power, of course, then he appointed people like, Bolton and Pompeo, the very hardcore neocons. So ordinary people are very frustrated because they can't trust anybody. The media is taken over. It's owned by the same people as probably the arms manufacturers and the pharmaceutical companies, and people, they don't know where to turn. They can't trust anybody, which is why you then get the rise in alternative media, and even that gets infiltrated. And so people aren't foolish. They trust their intuition, their instinct. They know they're being lied to all the time, and they're being manipulated. They're being set against each other, and that's where we are. But I don't want to be too negative, because I do have faith in people. Vast majority of people I come across, and I meet a lot of people in my line of work, are good people, really kind, decent people. And I'd say 98% of humanity, they're kind, they want what's best for themselves and their family, but also their friends and the society at large. People are decent inherently. But unfortunately, there's a tiny percentage of psychopaths that rise to positions of power that cause problems for the rest of us.
I agree with that on a lot of different levels. First of all, I think that, like in the United States, our two-party system is inherently corrupt because neither party represents actual people other than themselves and the acquisition and the maintenance of power. But what I really do agree with you on, and I do also hear a sense of hopefulness in the record too, but certainly in this conversation, that people are generally inherently good, and we all want similar things, but we also have different things that are pulling us in one direction or another. It is very hard in the United States to find what the truth is, what real information is, because we're not looking at traditional sources of news anymore. We're looking at our phones, and our phones are basically turned into a giant cesspool of ideas, and many of those ideas are fabricated and falsehood. So we're in a very difficult time trying to figure out, what should we be thinking about, and what are the truths of the world?
Yeah, I mean, echo chambers, and we're all guilty of that, reinforcing our own prejudices through echo chambers, and years ago when newspapers were more powerful, you may pick up a newspaper and you would come across articles that you wouldn't necessarily be seeking out, but you would come across more diverse range of information, even if some of it was, of course, propaganda, I suppose. But these days, I guess many of us, all of us possibly, we tend to gravitate towards news outlets which do reinforce our own points of view, which is not necessarily a healthy thing, of course, because this exacerbates this divisiveness, this polarization that's going on. And I think, in simple terms, I think we live in a world full of so many distractions. I know we all struggle with getting our kids off of their phones and the screen age, as we call them. It's so predominant and it's so difficult. I mean, one thing I personally try to do is have periods where I just don't, I haven't had a television for 25 years, and I do watch films and stuff like that. And I try to have a certain amount of time without distractions just to sit and think. And I think all of us need to have time to get to know ourselves better and to get to in touch with our own intuition and our own filter system. And cliched things like even getting closer to nature and spending time alone just to really think is a good way of cleansing our instincts,
right?
I think, because otherwise we are really the victim of so much manipulation and propaganda. And as you say, and social media particularly is a cesspool. It's awful, a lot of it. And I think to try to discipline ourselves, to have personal discipline in our own lives and limit the amount of stuff that we expose ourselves to, and enhance our own personal relationships, physical relationships with friends, with family, and have thinking time to really listen to the sound of our own thoughts. Because I find, wherever you go, there's music playing, like you go to in a taxi, you go to a shop, to a restaurant, there's distraction all the time. Almost we're being distracted from our own thoughts. I think it's good to have time just to clear the head, clear the heart, and really figure out, think and feel, start to feel as well as think what you want in life, what's important to you, and just see what comes to the surface.
You mentioned how much of this record is more personal than political, and it's very, very true. And one of the songs, which kind of, in a way, kind of dabbles with both, but certainly probably more personal in the way it was inspired from, was Linoleum Smooth to the Socking Foot. It's a fascinating story in the sense that you were hospitalized and very, very ill during the time of the pandemic. Tell me about that situation, because I mean, in what I've read so far, it sounds like you were very, very close to dying.
Yes, I was, unfortunately, and it was a bizarre thing, really, because the pandemic had just reached fever pitch, and I came down with this very bad throat infection. I thought it was just a regular sore throat, or maybe even tonsillitis, but it turned out to be an abscess, quite a serious abscess in the pharynx, and it grew and grew, and it was, the only way I could describe it was like having a small python wrapped around your windpipe, squeezing me. And I ended up getting rushed to hospital and then rushed to another hospital, and they recommended I have the operation, basically having my throat cut open to drain the abscess. And I was very resistant to this because I kept saying, look, I'm a singer. I was very worried it would affect my voice. And it got to the point, after I resisted for a few days, they said, this is no longer about tone of voice. This is about life and death. We could have 30 minutes to get to you and we won't be able to get you in time. And basically you're going to be dead. And so then once I was told that, of course, I agreed and went ahead with the operation. And in the aftermath of the operation, it was quite intense because of the morphine. Anyone that's had morphine knows what that's like. It's and there was various other medications and very strong antibiotics on a drip. And so it put me in a very strange state of mind, which was exacerbated, magnified by the weirdness in the hospital with everybody being masked up. I wasn't allowed visitors. And the hospital, parts of it were closed. It seemed dark. It seemed cold. It was a very, very strange experience. And it put me in mind, there was a brilliant Tarkovsky film called Solaris, where they're up on this spaceship and everything's very strange and hallucinogenic. And it felt a bit like that. It felt very weird. And I thought I had to try to create a positive out of a negative. And so I thought, let's start writing. So as I was wandering around the corridors or lying in the bed, and I started to write Linoleum Smooths to the Stocking Foot, which was about that experience.
You've been involved in a lot of other things, in particular, during your hiatus, the Cineola label for soundtracks and spoken word projects, also Radio Cineola. But one of the things that was really intriguing to me was the publishing company, the 51st State Publishing. And one of the first things that you released was the memoir of your father. And interestingly enough, in the album, you wrote about the loss of your father. I had to believe that both projects had to be extraordinarily, I don't know if difficult or emotional is the right word, but they had to be very powerful to do both, to have a hand in reflecting both of those situations.
Yeah, well, with the book, because my dad wanted to be a writer, and he wrote lots of short stories over the years. He was a lovely man. I loved my dad, and he worked in the docks when he was younger, which was the East London docks, quite a tough place to work. Then he was obviously a publican, running with my mother and his brother what became East London's most famous music pub. And so there was all these great stories, and then he was writing them down, and I thought, for his 80th birthday, as a present, I decided I'd edit it and publish it. So I created a small book publishing company, and it did very well. I got him on national radio, and we did big speaking events and lots of interviews and interesting publications. And he went very, very well, and the book sold pretty well, actually. So that was a really lovely thing, nicest present I ever gave to my dad. Probably one of the nicest presents he ever had, really. And he absolutely loved it, being in the position to tell all these wonderful stories. And the book is still selling today. And what happened in terms of then writing the song for him, it was during the last tour, which was the Comeback Special Tour in 2018. Unfortunately, it was 2 days before we were about to play the Royal Albert Hall in London. My father died. And so I had to carry on performing, of course. And I remember being at the Royal Albert Hall and looking up at the box where he would have been sitting. And it was very emotional. It was a very difficult thing to do. But, I'm a professional singer and performer, and you have to compartmentalize. I'm certainly not the only person that's been in that position.
Sure.
Sports people and performers, you have to find a way of getting on with it. But writing this album, because I've written songs. I've lost now 4 members of my immediate family. I've lost 2 brothers, my mother, and then my dad. And I've written songs for all of them. And I hope I don't have to write any more of these songs. Sincerely, I hope that. But I wrote Where Do We Go When We Die for my dad, and it's the song it's a very emotional song, but it's hopeful in that it really, I'm writing about what I believe, the cycles of life and rebirth and the eternal nature of the soul. And that's what I believe, whether I'm right or wrong. It's just my feeling, my belief. And I wanted to put that into song form. And I love singing that song live, actually. And although it's a new song, it gets received very well live.
Yeah, it's a beautiful song, and the fact that you have been so involved and not just as a son, but telling presenting your dad's story. When I read that and put them 2 and 2 together, I thought, who doesn't wish they could do that for their own father? To give them that opportunity to tell their story and then to honor them continuing on even after they pass. That's what a wonderful thing to have done.
No, thank you. I appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I also read another interview that you had done, and I thought this was like so interesting. So I'm of the age where, in 1983, that would have been like my the beginning of my senior year in high school, and Soul Mining was a big record for us, and certainly for me and my friends. And to me, This Is the Day is one of the most amazing songs ever. And to me, that just screams out the 80s to me. That just, puts me back in that place. And the thing that's so interesting about it is to hear you talk about that song now and how over the years, the meaning of that song has changed so dramatically for you, and that it has aged better in a lot of ways for you than maybe when you wrote it when you were still in your 20s. Tell me about how that song has aged positively for you.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. This is just several weeks ago, actually, or a couple of months ago. My younger brother Gerard, who's a film director, whose films I score, we've just recently sold our late father's house. He died 6 years ago, our dad, but we were very sentimental. We didn't get rid of the house straight away because it was full of so much stuff, so many old belongings from our mother, our father, our two brothers, and we couldn't face doing it. But recently we did do it. We put that house up for sale, so we had to clear it out. And we were going through boxes of things, and I came across all these old letters that written by my younger brother Eugene, the one who died when he was 24, letters that he wrote to one of his girlfriends and letters that she wrote back. And I'd never seen these letters before, and they were so emotional. And I sat there reading some old letters, crying, thinking about my family, about my life. And as I sat there on the floor reading these letters and crying, I thought, my God, This Is the Day in my own song. And it was fascinating to me because when I released that song originally, we made a video, and I wasn't very keen on the video because it was shot on video itself, not on film. I didn't like the look of it. But what was valuable to me about that video is that it included all members of my family, my dad, my mum, all my brothers, and my girlfriend at the time. And four of those people are no longer here anymore. And so the song becomes more and more poignant. And in fact, it was written, but I wrote it when I was about 20, which was strange, really. I was a young person and just starting off. I didn't realize that song, I'd still be singing it 40 years down the line, and it would have even greater meaning for me. But there it is. And that's, I suppose, the sign of it is my most successful song, and not necessarily my best, but certainly my most successful and most well-known. And it's become a standard, I suppose, in that other people cover it. It gets used in films and adverts. And it'd be nice if I wrote a few more of those that could become standards, but at least I've written one.
To come back after so many years, I know you've been touring for the last couple of years. This isn't, something that's just happening, in 2024. So part of this tour is you're performing Ensoulment, in its entirety, and then doing the hits. But in coming back and performing, how does it feel to be back on stage, to be singing songs like This Is the Day or some of the others, and then to introduce them to a whole new set of the songs? I mean, how does that register with you after all this time?
Well, it was tricky with. I made the decision to play the whole of the new album as the first set, and it's a tricky one really for the audience because they don't know those songs so well. I mean, they're starting to know them obviously because the album's been out a few weeks, but to make them sit through a whole album of songs they don't know that well. But the audiences have been very, very responsive so far, which has been wonderful. They've been listening, and I do say the first set is really the listening set, the second set is the dancing set. And in terms of the other set and the songs that we play, I've tried to represent each of the albums, even going back to Burning Blue Soul and up to Naked Self as well. So there's at least one song from each of the albums. And during the rehearsal period, I do try a lot of different songs, and I only can include songs that I really feel that I can do justice to and sing with meaning, and I don't want to just be on a stage going through the motions. And so I do emotionally feel connected to all of the songs that I'm singing. Obviously, I'm not 25 years old anymore. I don't run around the stage like I used to when I was 25, but I think that's unseemly. I think it's very important to have the dignity to act your age, whatever age you are, and I think, and I'm now singing to an older audience as well as to a younger audience. There are younger people that like my stuff as well, of course. And I think you have to express from where you are at this moment. You've got to be sort of truthful. This is who I am at this moment in time. This is where I am. This is what I feel. This is what I think. And then you have to to be true to yourself.
I think after 43 years, even when I hear your music, I got to sit down.
Yeah.
I can't run. I can't run like I used to. Not at this age.
No.
You're going to be in Boston at the Orpheum on October 19th. It's going to be a great show, Matt. It is a real honor and a joy to talk to you today. I love I mean, I've got all your records, but I really do enjoy the new one. It's such a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the interview, and and great questions, and lovely to speak to you, and looking forward to Boston as always.
Thank you, Matt. Take care.
Thank you. You take care.
The name of the new album from The is called Ensoulment. And like I said, Matt and the band will be in Boston at the Orpheum Theater on October 19th. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can always email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.